let us go into a, let's make like a take. We can make like an HQ take maybe. HQ, you'll remember how the takes work from before. They basically just save a bunch of settings out. And so for this one, we'll say that, bam. HQ will be smaller division size here. HQ will be 3 steps maybe on here. It'll be the full 600 voxels simulation on here. That's probably enough for now. We could also actually say like, how about we just give this like a special name? We could say volume source HQ style. We'll say .v0 just in case we need to come back to that. And let's just save these out real quick in the HQ mode, and then we can come back and finish the job. So I ended up having to change where these files went to. They were filling up my C drive because they were so huge. I put them into my D drive. Yes, I'm using Windows. I'm sorry. But in any case, that's why this path doesn't match probably what you just saw. But it did finish, and we've got all this crazy high-res, crunchy-looking input, which will be really nice for our actual 600 voxel sim. I'm going to go back to this mode here for a minute. We need to now do a volume output. So let's make a geometry node. There it is. Say volume output. This is, of course, going to be all of the density fields and the velocity fields. And actually, now that I think about it, we need to turn on our rest fields. So let's set up import fields. Bam. We're gonna want the smoke object 1. That's the name of the default object here. That's the actual sim, of course, that we're gonna be importing from. Throw that in there. And then the rest field needs to be enabled. Don't know why it's doing that. Okay, there we go. The rest field, if you remember from the earlier lesson, it's got to be turned on a couple of places. It's got to turn on initial data on the smoke object, and it says add rest field. And what ends up happening actually is that when we go here, we're going to go to advanced rest, and it's actually going to make 2 rest fields. I'm going to say we probably want something like 15 frames between it resetting, because this is not like a crazy fast moving sim. So we can afford to have a longer period between it. Also, always set rest affection rate to 1 because we want it to move completely with our simulation. We never really want that to not be at 1. Anyway, so we're back over here. I'm just gonna push it in maybe like a frame into the sim. That way we can make sure that we're getting what we want. So here's density. Density shows up. Wonderful. What else we need? We want the velocity, and that already looks wrong. It's only wrong because we don't want to see the velocity represented as smoke. It's pulling in the right things, and it's going to be the same for this as well. Keep that invisible. Now if I middle click on this, I got the velocity field, I got the rest field. I need the other rest field too. Great. That's everything we need. All we really need to do is file cache it to somewhere cool. This one I'm gonna have to put on the D drive also, I guess. And that's just me not having disk space, but I won't bore you with that. I'll put it somewhere, and then I'm gonna write it out now, and we'll come back and look probably in a few hours at our final high-res sim. All right, a couple of hours later, and we've got our new sim and our new flipbug. Boosh. Looks great, actually. Looks really cool. We've got our streaks. We've got a really nice variation of density everywhere. It never gets too hard or like no hard CG edges. We've got, because we brought some of the gravity back in, we can see it sinking and making that roiling edge that I like. It's just a lot of complexity everywhere, and a lot more, I bet, shows up when we actually do our render now. So I'm just gonna copy over our pyro shader from our previous lesson and also our mantra node, and I'll just go over real quick again what those settings were without getting into too much detail. If you need more detail on the rendering and shading, please go back to my previous lesson. But otherwise, most of those settings should be pretty good to go, and maybe some light tweaks too. Okay, so I copied over the pyro shader and put it over here in the shop area. The pyro shader is going to need a few changes. It's going to need, at the very least, scattering phase 0.2 would be nice. This is last time we kind of had a weird smoky dust steam thing with a light inside of it, so I kind of want the light to transmit through. For this, this kind of sooty look, the scattering phase being 0.2 is going to mean a lot of the light's going to really bounce off of it. It's going to reflect off of it and back at us, which is fine. Obviously, we're not changing anything with the fire. I'm thinking the shadow density, we'll just pump it up a little bit just for effect, just to make it look a little more intense. The noise is largely going to be the same. We spent a lot of time trying to figure that out last time. We're just going to keep it. So that was the frequency of 4. Remember, this is the texture noise that's being defined by the rest fields. Again, not going to go into all specifics. You'll have to see the previous lesson otherwise, but the final amplitude here, this was mostly a noise that was pretty close to, pretty dark, hence the bias being low like this, and would just punch lots of little holes out of our smoke. Didn't really change anything else. The mantra node here, just updated the frame range to 50. Probably actually not going to use any sort of bouncing around inside at this time, just so it doesn't take forever to render. If you could afford it, you could probably turn it on, but I'm not gonna spend the time on doing the actual scattering inside of it. 6 and 6 is good. Noise level 0.1 is good. These are all, again, the 100th time, these are all the same as last time. These are just, I like these as just good default quality settings anyway. Noise level 0.1, like, push this as high as you can go until you have unacceptable noise. If you have noise in the fringes, that may not come through in the comp anyway, so just keep it there. Volume quality, same thing. These are aggressive settings to make it render faster, and that's fine. You know, if you have rendering artifacts, bring them back down. But I would rather start there than waste time. Cool. What else do we need? We're gonna need a ground plane. Oops. So we'll just call this. I'll just make it super big. And we'll just call it something like ground, maybe, or the ground. Cool. We're gonna want to actually set up this stuff here. The ground can be a mat, maybe. We can, let's see, we got to put in our rigids. Actually, we need the rigids, of course, and our volume out. Those will be forced to render. Cool. We'll want to have the actual rigids themselves have velocity blur on them. Oh, that's the normals, actually. There we go. So it's going to use the V values on the points for motion blur, and now that we have motion blur on, that'll work. And that is just about everything, I believe. So real quick before we finish. Oh, actually, I want to have the distant light be 1. I want to have the environment light play a much larger role this time. And that should do it. I'm going to do a quick frame here just to see. I'm going to choose like, let's see. Maybe we'll make this bigger too while we're at it. Cool. Just got to change this back to HQ, or even better, of course, is set this to HQ. So no matter what take we're in. When I try to render it, it'll use the correct one. So let's just make a frame before we send the whole thing off, and then we'll see what it looks like. It didn't take too long, thankfully. Only took a couple minutes. And there it is. I still have these extra image planes on from last time. So here's our key lighting. So super dark shadows, super bright light otherwise. Our more general environment light, and together we've got this. And I think that'll do. Yeah, we see some of our detail in here. I think this is gonna look really cool, fully rendered out. So without further ado, let's render the whole thing, and hopefully this is done tomorrow morning. Set the HQ 1 to 50, and away we go.